much damage towards the end? Did it get worse?
I was stable on those 20 points I was mentioning, so considering all in all it was a solid race. Need to see what happened there damage-wise between 9 and 10. I believe I can be a beaver.
Can you imagine that a rodent, in the middle of a Formula One track, is responsible for destroying the career of a 7-time world champion? Well, that is exactly what happened in the Canada Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton, at the wheel of Ferrari's SF25, saw his performance evaporate after a mysterious incident in the Vuelta 13. Today I tell you why this was not only an anecdote, but the sample of something much deeper that is destroying the Ferrari season from within. The return 13 of the Canada 2025 Grand Prix was transformed, without prior notice, at a break point for Lewis Hamilton. Everything indicated that the British in command of Ferrari's SF25 was building a solid race. He had started from the 5th position with a constant rhythm and a car behavior that allowed to think of a strategic progression towards higher positions. On a track as treacherous as the Circuit Gilles-Villeneuve, where the management of tires, the precision in the braking and the aerodynamic balance are fundamental, Hamilton was in control. But that return changed everything. At that height of the race, and without an aggressive maneuver with another pilot or immediate visual signs of external contact, his career engineer Riccardo Adami communicated something alarming by radio. They had detected a loss of 20 aerodynamic load points. For F1 standards, that is equivalent to taking away a crucial part of the technical soul of the car. It is an invisible blow to the eyes of the public, but devastating in terms of performance. The most surprising thing was not only the magnitude of the loss, but the reason. There had been an impact against a marmot. A wild animal, common on the island of Notre Dame where the circuit is located, crossed at the least appropriate time and place, just before the hairpin of the final sector. The Ferrari, who was traveling at more than 280 kilometers per hour in that section, had no room to avoid it. This type of incidence with local fauna is not new in Montreal. Already in previous seasons similar cases have been reported, such as Nicolas Latifi in 2022. But never one with such deep consequences for a team and a pilot in full struggle to consolidate its performance after a complicated seasonal start. Circuit Gilles-Villeneuve marmots are a difficult constant to control, despite the efforts of the organization. His unforeseen appearance is a real risk factor, and this time it was one of the most experienced grille contestants. What followed the impact was a chain of silent but forceful consequences. The lost aerodynamic load immediately affected the stability of the car, especially in the rear axle, compromising traction in curve outlet areas. Hamilton, a pilot who stands out for his sensitivity to the balance of the car, began to suffer. The SF25, which until then behaved with relative neutrality, began to become unstable, erratic in transitions between rapid and slow curves. Although from outside it seemed that he continued to push, the internal reality was different. He was driving with an invisible deficit, struggling to maintain control of a car that no longer responded as he should. This type of damage also unleashes a psychological collateral effect. The pilot loses confidence. Each input to curve demands mental adjustments. The braking reference changes. The career rhythm becomes inconsistent. And in a sport where each tenth of the second defends itself as if it were gold, losing mental control over the car is equivalent to losing the race. Although he did not abandon, Hamilton fell into the classification, being advanced even by Charles Leclerc, who began behind his and managed to capitalize on his best mechanical state during the stops and boxes. The Marmota, a minor element in the circuit ecosystem, became the largest symbol of Ferrari's silent drama in Canada. A lap, a small creature, and the fate of a race was completely twisted. Losing 20 aerodynamic load points is not a simple statistic. In Formula One, where each element of the car has been designed, optimized and tested to operate in an extremely precise balance, that figure represents a critical disruption in the dynamic behavior of the car. To understand the true impact, you have to enter the physics that governs an F1 car. The aerodynamic load is what keeps the car stuck to the ground when it takes curves at very high speeds. It is mainly generated through the flat background, the diffuser, the ailerons and other elements such as the design of the suspensions and the airflow pipes. It is literally transformed air and grip. A loss of 20 points implies a considerable decrease in that descending force. It is not just about going slower in line or curve, it is about losing precision in each maneuver. The car becomes less stable in braking, more subverator or overcoming depending on where the damage is concentrated. If the aerodynamic flow is broken, the distribution of the grip between the axes changes, and that forces the pilot to constantly correct. And this is where it becomes evident why the damage was so devastating for Hamilton. The SF25 is not a car that allows large margins of error. From the preseason, it was known that Ferrari had produced an extremely sensitive car to aerodynamic flow changes. There is no flexibility in its design, which makes any unexpected alteration, such as that caused by the impact with the Marmot, is amplified by the structural weaknesses of the chassis. This loss of aerodynamic load also impacts directly on tire management. Without proper grip, lateral sliding increases, which in turn raises the temperatures of the tire and accelerates its degradation. In a race like Montreal, where the available grip is limited and track temperatures are usually low, keeping tires inside its optimal window is vital. Hamilton not only lost absolute performance, he also lost the possibility of maintaining a competitive strategy in terms of the useful life of his compounds. This explains why, even when Leclerc entered boxes later, he managed to leave in front. Hamilton had no way to maintain an effective defense or before or after the stop. In addition, in terms of equipment strategy, losing aerodynamic load forces to change the simulation parameters in real time. Ferrari had to reassess each projected scenario, from the ideal stop time to the way of defending position. Engineers do not work with improvisations. They do it with mathematical models that depend on reliable inputs. A damaged car breaks those predictions. Therefore, Hamilton's car, even on track, was out of simulation. It was a variable that no longer adjusted to any viable strategic plan, something that, in full prize, leaves the pilot tactically isolated. And if that were not enough, there is also the emotional impact. For a pilot of the experience and demand of Hamilton, who has built his legacy about the total control of the tools he uses, feeling that his car does not respond with surgical precision is frustrating. It is not only a time lost in chronometer, but about the disconnection between pilot and machine. That synergy that gave him championships so many years is lost in an instant, and the pilot becomes a victim of circumstances, caught in a car that is no longer competitive, without having made a single human error. And all due to an alteration in the airflow caused by an unforeseen event that, in other more robust teams, could have been better absorbed. In Ferrari, on the other hand, he revealed the technical fragility that still does not correlate after years of internal restructuring. The damage suffered by Lewis Hamilton in Canada should not only be seen as a consequence of an isolated event, but as a revealing symptom of a much deeper structural disease that affects SF25. This car, born of Ferrari's need to take a definitive step towards the fight for the championship, has proven in many ways an excessively delicate engineering product. What in other teams could have been a minor problem, in Ferrari it became a functional collapse. This is because the SF25 has been built on an extremely sensitive platform to any aerodynamic disturbance, to the point that a partial impact can destabilize all the balance of forces that keeps it competitive. This behavior reflects a deeper conceptual error in design. Ferrari opted for an aggressive solution to maximize performance in ideal conditions, sacrificing robustness. Maximum aerodynamic efficiency was prioritized under perfect simulations, but the car tolerance was left aside to real race conditions. In modern Formula One, cars should not only be fast, but also resistant to the unpredictability of a Grand Prix. Minor impacts, sudden changes of wind, track dirt, changing temperatures. The SF25 has not demonstrated the capacity to adapt to these variables without compromising their competitive integrity. In addition, Hamilton's case is not an isolated event. Charles Leclerc has also reported, in different races, similar problems when the car suffers slight damage or aerodynamic mismatches. In Montreal's own race, Leclerc benefited from not having to deal with this load loss, and still showed limitations in the curve when the car touched the adhesion limit. This tells us about a pattern. The SF25 only yields when the conditions are exactly those planned in the wind tunnel. But in the reality of Formula One, where chaos and the unpredictable are the norm, that conceptual rigidity is a conviction. What happened in the GP of Canada 2025 cannot simply be filed as a picturesque anecdote in the history of Formula One. The image of a marmota crossing on the path of Lewis Hamilton and triggering a loss of 20 aerodynamic load points should not cause only an ironic smile. It is a forceful metaphor for the structural fragility that the present of Ferrari defines today. A car that aspires to the world title cannot afford to be so vulnerable to external variables. Because if something teaches the story of this sport, it is that the championships are not lost solely due to strategic failures or errors of the pilot. They are also lost in those gray, unnoticed moments, in which an excessively rigid design ceases to be competitive in the face of the unexpected. Hamilton arrived in Ferrari looking for a redemption, a new cycle in his legendary career. Many thought their experience would be enough to stabilize a historically erratic team, and in part it is achieving it. His adaptation has been fast, his technical work with engineers is tireless, and his determination remains intact. But there are things that not even 7 times world champion can control, as the unpredictable nature of a car that behaves like a crystal jewel. The damage suffered in Canada is not just a setback in the points table. It is a warning sign that Ferrari cannot ignore if he really wants to build a champion project. Today's Formula One requires more than pure performance. It demands consistency under pressure, adaptability to chaos, and the ability to absorb both physical and strategic blows without being down. And this is where Ferrari continues to fail. The Canada GP was a brutal lesson. Performance is not enough if it is not accompanied by conceptual robustness. The competition is increasingly tight, the margins are minimal, and any weakness, however small it seems, is exploited by the rivals. That is why now I ask you, do you think Ferrari can reverse this trend? Can a team with such history and resources redesign your technical approach in the middle of the season to prevent this type of vulnerabilities from continuing to condition your performance? Leave me your opinion in the comments.